I think the Trump administration will push for the Palestinian Authority to have a greater role. Until now, Israel has opposed that completely.
Now, this has just come in. It is a statement from President-elect Donald Trump. He's posted this on social media on the Truth Social platform. I'm going to read it to you as it appears on that platform, as I can see it in front of me now. And I'm quoting, "This epic, capitalized in the ceasefire agreement could only have happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. I'm thrilled American and Israeli hostages will be returning home to be reunited with their families and loved ones." And the Donald Trump statement goes on, "With this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength." Peace through strength is in capitals throughout the region. And as we build upon the momentum of this ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords, this is only the beginning of great things to come for America and indeed the world. We have achieved, the final paragraph of the Donald Trump statement goes on, "We've achieved so much without even being in the White House. Just imagine all of the wonderful things that will happen when I return to the White House and my administration is fully confirmed, so they can secure more victories for the United States." And that concludes the statement from Donald Trump. And but I suppose the triumphal nature and tone of that statement, it speaks very much for himself. Donald Trump claiming not some, but essentially all of the credit for the breakthrough represented by the ceasefire agreement we are now hoping to hear announced from Qatar by the Qatari Prime Minister. Of course, the outgoing president still, for the next few days, Joe Biden and his team, they would dispute this. They would say that their efforts through the work, especially of Antony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, at least until Monday, that was also instrumental and important in achieving this deal. But there you see Donald Trump putting his angle on this, putting his side of this, arguing that this is very much his work and the credit is due to him, and giving the note that, well, he argues here in this statement, and I'm quoting again, "only the beginning of great things to come for America and indeed the world." Now, on Monday, of course, we'll see Donald Trump inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States, having served, of course, as the 45th in his last term. It will be, in so many ways, a world altered by the arrival of Donald Trump. There can be no real dispute, can there, that the imminence of the Donald Trump second presidency has been, well, very much the game changer in bringing about the ceasefire deal we're now waiting to hear announced. And of course, Donald Trump's second presidency, the implications, the ramifications of that will not end with that. We're looking straight away. I was speaking a moment ago to a Ukrainian politician. There will be waves felt in Ukraine in a very, very significant way. And meanwhile, we will carry on looking at what is going on, what we're waiting to hear announced in the Gaza war. I can get the thoughts now for you of an expert, someone with a good deal of knowledge of this from Israel. Chuck Freilich is the former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel, also a long-term senior fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center, and is live on the line. Chuck, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Could you just share your thoughts at this moment on what we think we're now about to hear?
Well, on the one hand, this is, of course, a moment of great joy that we will be getting some of the hostages back, and hopefully the rest in a few weeks from now. But it is also a less joyful occasion because Hamas, which has been defeated militarily, has been able to use the hostages to extract a political victory, and they will remain in power in Gaza, the primary political force there. And of course, we've already seen that wherever in those parts of Gaza that Israel has already withdrawn from, they have been reconstituting, rebuilding their capabilities, and have actually fired rockets into Israel again in the last week. They will undoubtedly do that as Israel now withdraws from the rest of Gaza. So this is a mixed picture. It is, to a certain extent, a victory for terrorism. On the other hand, Israel's ultimate commitment is to get its people back home.
Yes, and the hope is that we'll see Well, as much as conceivably possible of that achieved with the statement we're now waiting to hear from the Qatari leader. Obviously, there will be, strong feelings stirring in the hearts of the loved ones of those hostages. One can only imagine what the hostages are going through at this precise moment. And those in the Palestinian area, 40,000, who knows, tens of thousands of people have lost their lives. Others are suffering. Really, it is reported, really quite appallingly. And this, one would hope, is going to open up aid to the people who need it so desperately. There will also be a big political question that bears on all of that, won't there, Chuck? And that is, who is to run Gaza after this ceasefire takes effect? We don't know the answer to that. It's absolutely crucial for the immediate and the eventual future. Do we expect to hear that in this statement? What are your expectations?
Well, before that, if I could say one thing.
Indeed.
You mentioned before the 46,000 figure, now you said 40,000. The figures are those from the Hamas-run health ministry.
Yes.
Okay, they do not differentiate between civilians and combatants, or terrorists in this case, and we're talking probably close to 20,000 of them. So that the number of civilians, which is still, of course, very high, is much smaller than this figure, which people can continually repeat. There is a price for starting wars of annihilation, which is what this war was intended to be. We know that Sinwar had a very clear plan for Israel's destruction, and he didn't do badly that first day. His bad luck, or his one big mistake, was assuming that Iran and Hezbollah were going to join in fully from day one, and that didn't happen, and that certainly contributed to the defeat of his strategy. But the question you're raising now, of course, is a critical one: who takes over? I think the Trump administration will push for the Palestinian Authority to have a greater role. Until now, Israel has opposed that completely. I think that the hell to pay that the president-elect has spoken about, which many in Israel interpreted as being directed towards Hamas, actually was directed mostly towards Israel in recent weeks. And we may see the president applying heavy pressure on Israel to go ahead with a at least a PA-affiliated government in Gaza. And frankly, since I don't think there are any realistic alternatives, it's the best or the bad.
Okay, so it is your view, and it's an interesting one, that you think that we will see after this some pressure from the incoming president on Israel to allow the Palestinian Authority, the authority on the West Bank, to assume a significant role in the management of Gaza. We do not know the answer to that, but that's an important question. We'll see whether that features. As for pressure from Donald Trump, he has said there would be hell to pay if this deal was not struck. I was speaking earlier in the day to a senior member of the Trump circle. He believed the threat of hell to pay applied to those supporting Hamas, and in particular Iran, suggested there would be military action against Iran were this deal not to have been reached. Anyway, so many more questions in there. We're going to be addressing them as we go on. Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel, thank you for joining us. You're listening to Drive on Times Radio. Douglas Alexander, who's a trade minister in the Labour government. Welcome to you, Douglas.
Good evening, John.
I must obviously ask you first for your thoughts on the news we're expecting to see confirmed at some point in the, we think, imminent future of a peace deal, a ceasefire deal in Gaza. What are your thoughts on that, Douglas?
Well, obviously, everyone, including the British government, is waiting for the formal announcement from the Qatari ministry that we're expecting in the next few minutes. But while details are clearly still emerging, after what have been months of devastating, horrific bloodshed and countless lives lost, frankly, this is a long overdue and welcome piece of news that the Israeli and Palestinian people have been desperately waiting for. We've been absolutely consistent as a government that we must see a ceasefire that enables the hostages to be released, that allows aid actually to get into Gaza,
yes,
and to create the conditions for a lasting peace. So there's a real sense of expectation about the announcement that we're hopefully going to hear in the next few minutes.
Well, indeed, and all of our thoughts will naturally be as they should be with the hostages, those who remain alive in the custody of Hamas, and those who are praying and hoping for them to be released, and to see that the ones they love are among those who are freed, and of course with the people of Palestine of the Palestinian areas who've lost so much, the lives lost, the suffering endured. They need to be mentioned first and foremost, of course.
Well, of course, as you suggest, it's important to reflect upon the hostages who are still alive and the hope that this deal gives them and their families that have endured unimaginable horrors over recent months. But honestly, it's also important that we reflect tonight on those who won't make it home, including British hostages who have been murdered. And we continue to mourn and to remember them, even in this moment of light amidst the darkness. But you're right to recognise that what Hamas and Sinwar visited upon, not just the people of Israel, but ultimately the people of Palestine on October the 7th, has been truly horrendous. And in that sense, there is a huge interest both in Israel and amongst the Palestinian people that we are able to move beyond the horrific chapter that we have just witnessed. We need to see a credible prospect of a Palestinian state emerging in the future, but more immediately, we need to make sure that aid workers are able to get full and unfettered access to Gaza, where the level of human suffering is unimaginable each and every day.
I fully understand, of course, that you are a trade minister. You are not a foreign office minister, but I also know that you take a very close interest in foreign policy, overseas policy, including the thing that we're discussing just at the moment. So I am more than interested to hear your views on some of the things you touch on there. What, as you perceive it and would express it, what are the hopes and aims of the British government when it comes to the future for Gaza from here on in? There is a big question mark in the air as and when the ceasefire is announced and agreed, who will run Gaza? That's such an important question, and the British government will have input, a thought on that too.
Well, it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. I think I was actually the first British minister when I was Secretary of State for International Development under Gordon Brown's government to actually enter Gaza after a previous IDF incursion. And when I listened to your last guest on the show, I was reflecting that he was speaking to you from the Belfer Centre in Harvard. Actually, for 6 of the last 8 years, I've been a senior fellow at the Belfer Centre working in their Future of Diplomacy programme.
Yes.
So you're right to recognise it's an area and an issue that has informed and shaped a lot of our thinking over recent years. One of the questions that has been constantly in observers' minds has been, if you like, what is the political strategy to follow the military strategy of Israel?
Yes.
I am not in the privileged position of any longer being a senior fellow at the Belfer Centre, so you'll appreciate it's not for me to offer, if you like, uninformed commentary on that, much as it's an issue of interest.
Yes.
I think what's right to do is to recognise that we seem to be on the cusp of a genuine breakthrough in what has been a situation that has been sadly lacking in breakthroughs ever since the horrific incursion on October the 7th. And in that sense, notwithstanding the remarks that we've just heard, I think it's fair to pay due process and credit to people like Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, Bill Burns, the CIA Director, and the whole US diplomatic team who, working closely with the Israelis, with the interlocutors of the government itself within Qatar, have been working very hard to get to this day.
Yes, earlier I read, as it appeared on social media, a statement from the incoming President-elect Donald Trump, who's speaking or writing on Truth Social, and claiming very significant credit, if not all the credit, for this diplomatic breakthrough. He did touch on the Abraham Accords. Now, that was something like an embryonic deal that would have meant significant progress in the Middle East. It would have involved, among other things, Saudi Arabia in a new accord with Israel, some recognition, diplomatic ties restored. That was broken, of course, by the attack on October the 7th. Many would say that the attack was designed in many ways to achieve exactly that. Now, there will be those, and I'm guessing you're one of them, who would hope to see some further progress on that, at least, in the days ahead.
Well, ultimately, you're right in recognising much of the commentary trying to explain the horrific criminality of Hamas on October the 7th alights on the fact that there seemed to be a realistic prospect at that point that the Abraham Accords would be effectively extended by the normalisation of relationships between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I can't honestly speculate as to where the private conversations have reached between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, indeed the President-elect, and or the government of Israel, but it's right to recognise that the long-standing position, to be fair, of all British governments has been not simply the ambition of there being a viable Palestinian state alongside a secure Israel, but a secure Israel that enjoys normal relationships, not with one of its neighbours, but all of its neighbours and the whole of the region.
Yes.
And in that sense, I would pay due tribute to the Abraham Accords that were put in place. It's been transformative in terms of the relationship, for example, between Israel and the UAE. Let us hope that the ceasefire that we anticipate will be announced in the coming minutes and hours will be the foundation on which we can see further diplomatic breakthroughs and further progress towards those twin objectives of a secure Israel and a viable Palestine.
And you've been one of those, Douglas, in various guises to argue for a two-state solution in the Middle East. Is it overstating it to say that just seems such a remote prospect now?
Well, that's why on the night of October the 7th, long before I was back in Parliament, I tweeted that the barbarism perpetrated by Hamas was a barrier and not a bridge to the progress that many of us wanted to see.
Yeah.
If you like, Hamas sought to set a diabolic trap for Israel in the criminality of its activities on October the 7th. And let us hope that if we see the diplomatic progress that this deal would represent,
Yes.
that will be the foundation for diplomacy, words and language being the way forward to resolve differences in the Middle East
All right.
that all too often has resolved to violence in recent years.